actually is being learned. That's what is needed. One of the things that has not been explicitly said, but I feel is most likely believed by most of the parents here, and certainly all of the homeschool parents I know, is that, you know, homeschoolers have sort of helped to reframe the conversation on education to a degree. And it sounds like a lot of what we are doing, or what we see as the failures of public education, you know, you're talking about how you've been looking at that for a good number of years. Of what's happening? Where are things falling apart? But I would posit that we are reframing the conversation on parenting and the role of parents, not just in their child's education, but in the well-being of the child, in the solidity of the family. And, you know, as a group of homeschoolers here talking to you who represent our legislature, but also who is discussing the very important fact of education, what we have lost as a culture to a great degree is the parents' ability to believe in themselves as an authority on their children and what their children need. We who homeschool have taken that back to a great degree. And we've stood up and we've said, you know what, I'm going to insist on something here because I know it's for the good of my child. And we're looking at a culture, I believe, where there are parents who have handed over that authority and that responsibility because someone else is doing it. The school is doing it. And there are wonderful parents who remain involved, and those are the kids that do well. And then there are the parents who don't know to be involved, who are not their children's primary educators at home. And those are the children whose outcomes I believe you're speaking to. I believe you're speaking to that subset of kids who have not had the support for whatever reason in the home to allow their public school situation, and I believe public school is a necessity in a culture, not for every child, but in a culture, I think it's an important thing. But there is something that has shifted, and there's a great deal of study that's happened showing that this has started even as far back as World War II, that has removed the onus and the responsibility from the parents, and we are placing it on our systems. So I don't have any specific suggestions to you, but except to listen to that new conversation about how do we hand this back to parents. So as you, as our legislature, as our senator, you know, we are all concerned about the education that all of the children are receiving, not just our own. So we are speaking here specifically about homeschooling, but more generally about education. And I believe that we homeschool parents have something to bring to the table as far as how do you get parents engaged in that. So I don't know if I've made any sense here. It's kind of a philosophically based perspective, but I want to challenge you to open up that conversation with other people in the circles that you're in about how do we capture the parents? How do we put the power back into their hands to say, you are the decision maker. You are the primary authority. You are the person that needs to be equipped again to make fantastic decisions for your children. Because we're watching that go, and I know I have so many friends who are public school teachers, and there are so many parents that just let it go. They just take their hands off and assume their children are being raised and educated by the public school system. How can you, as our representative, change that conversation?
Well, I studied, actually the president of Finland came over and taught my class at grad school, and we looked at the Finnish system, you know, which ends up having the highest test scores, even though they never tested before, and then they suddenly started testing, and they said, oh, we have the highest scores, so we must be doing something right. Under the Finnish system, it's the entire society is different. A child who needs, and I'm not suggesting the kids go to school when they're 2 years old, believe me, that's not what I'm doing, but a parent who works and needs childcare for their child has that support. No one goes hungry. You know, everyone. It's a socialist country.
In fact, it is not. It is not a socialist country, and they've pushed back on that appellation. They are a free market economy in Finland. They have a lot of highly socialized programs, but they are not a socialist society.
Okay. But they have a lot of supports that we don't have, and that when we try to get passed, and they're vetoed. So, without getting into that, there's a difference in the support in society, and I understand, first, I don't understand really why people don't like the fact that I talk about families who don't have enough money, who, whether a single or a dual parent, they don't have the ability to do what you're doing. And in order to encourage them to do that, Kate, I think we would have to change our entire society. And
that's what we're working on here.
I'm working on trying to create economic diversity. You know, I come kind of from a tech entrepreneur background, and I'm thinking from the systems level, trying to increase economic diversity and to reduce disparity, and I come at most things from that lens. So that's what I'm looking at. So, you know, we could use you folks as models and goals, but we're so far from being able to get there. And it's such an enormous leap to get from where we are to where you folks are for the whole society, that it seems to me that we've got to deal with the economic disparity first, and I don't know how to.
One more comment, and then I'll turn my microphone off after this, but we have seen that the educational outcomes have reduced and reduced and reduced the more programs there are in this country, and that poverty was never an indicator previously to good education. There are certainly those outliers, and there have been, but I think what I'm challenging you to do is to seek a different model. That more programs is not necessarily the answer to empowering parents to be more involved. And I will turn my microphone off now. I think most of us have seen this to be true, that the more hand-holding there is, the less we are called upon to step in to that role that is ours and does belong to us as parents. And the more the state does that, the less we are required to. So I know we probably have a very different philosophical foundation to our political views on this, and it is very political. And I didn't want to open up that can of worms, but that's where a lot of us are coming from on this, is power back in the hands of the parents rather than in the school system and more funded programs.
So I think we have.
Katie had her hand up.
Yeah, I think we have time for about one more question or comment. Katie, if you want to go ahead. Katie, I think your microphone might not be on. We can't hear you. If you want to type it in the chat.
How about now?
Well, there we go. Great.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to speak real quick to like the low income thing and the two families not being able to like support financially homeschooling. My husband is a mechanic He does not make a lot of money. We live in Co-op County. There's not a whole lot to do up here. We, for 2 years, struggled incredibly financially. I recently picked up bartending as a way to be able to afford it. And you keep focusing on this whole thing of like, well, what if you can't financially support it? But I think that if you make it a priority, you figure out a way to financially support it. And like the comments that you're saying that were taken out of context, like, yeah, I work 40 hours a week. My husband works 40 hours a week. We switch off. He's always with a parent. And I just feel like, I just wanted to make the point of like, you know, people who are in low, who do fall in that low income bracket, just because they fall in that bracket doesn't necessarily mean that they're not where they need to be for homeschooling. And I'm a really young homeschooling mom. I was 19 when I had my son, but I knew right out of the gate that we were going to homeschool. There was never a question in my mind. I don't have a college education. I almost have an associate's degree in early childhood. And that was kind of what pushed me to make the decision to homeschool. I spent a lot of time in public schools, in public preschools, and I had the opportunity to see the push down curriculum, and I didn't want that for my son. So I just wanted to kind of make a point for the more low income people who do homeschool that, you know, just because they fall in that bracket of low income doesn't necessarily mean that they're not equipped to homeschool their children.
Yeah, but you get the double award, Katie. That's what you get, the double award, because you have to struggle twice, maybe I don't know, twice as much, but you have to struggle even more and have even more dedication. And I think, you know, it's amazing. And thank you for what you're doing for your kids. You know, it's great.
We do have sort of one last comment from Sarah, who's on the phone.
Hi, Senator. This is Krzyzewski again, and I just want to share. Okay, take it off. Sorry, I'm juggling my kids right now too. This is how we do it. Sometimes I run away into the other room for a second. But I just want to share, as an educator and a mom and an aunt, that you know, just to reiterate that this legislation is not geared towards homeschool parents, and that it is geared towards those kids that we, as a state, as a community, have an obligation to take care of, to make sure that they have the best opportunities and the most opportunities that they can have for their success, to open as many doors as possible. And from a very personal experience, my nephew is one of those kids that was really falling through the cracks. And part of that is that his mother, my older sister, was adopted into our family. She has fetal alcohol syndrome and does an incredible job as a single mother of 2 boys. However, she does not have the personal resources to go through their entire education plan. She has struggled with her time to be able to be present for meetings that she needs to be present for. And luckily enough, you know, our family has been able to step in, but that is not the case for all kids and all parents. So the question is, you know, with legislation like this, how does it address and support parents who, you know, even talking about falling through the cracks for a variety of reasons? How does it support parents and those kids to have the best access to the most opportunities that they can have for their best individual abilities for learning? And I think that, to me, is really important as a parent, as an educator, as someone who has seen kids slip through the cracks, who has, you know, obviously on a very personal level, seen my nephew struggle with slipping through the cracks a little bit. You know, how this legislation comes into play to support those families and those kids. Thanks very much.
Well, the legislation it's a very minor thing. It's a list of programs that a group of people in Concord have approved. What is for us, as you say, to do a better job at public schooling. And we have put in social emotional learning structure that's going to try to deal with the bullying and the stress and the social issues that come up. We are working with ELO coordinators, so what will help is having a better funding structure that can support transportation to some of these external programs. And there's a commission now that's looking at how can we make the schools more flexible. The commissioner has requested that we both supply online learning options as well as in-class options. And we have to be able to come up with some kind of structure that has more flexibility in it and is resourced more appropriately to be able to deal with the issues that you're talking about. And it's very, very difficult. It's a struggle. Public education, however, every single developed country has a good public education system. We in New Hampshire work very hard at that, and it varies by district. One thing that we're trying hard to do is to make it vary less by district so that more districts can be attractive to workforce and parents, getting way outside the subject matter here. But part of our housing problem has to do with the difference in school districts and so forth.